The game is set in the 42nd millennium. Imperium of Man has launched galaxy-wide in a decade-long campaign with a goal of reclaiming lost planets from its enemies. At the same time, an alien race known as the Tyranids of Hive Fleet Leviathan may have something to say about that. If you're a huge fan of Space Marine 1, you'll notice Captain Titus is voiced by Clive Standen, who replaced Mark Strong, and it's a good fit. Clive's big role, of course, was Rollo in Vikings, and while it may be noticeable to a lot of gamers if they played the original, I think that it's a pretty good initial voice acting role for him, and works quite well. Space Marine follows along the story from the original. Is this your first time in the Warhammer universe, let alone a game? Here's a quick primer. Marine chapters are the holy warriors. They fight for the purity of humanity against all enemies. They usually assume everybody's an enemy, and if they're innocent, they wait for them to make a mistake, and then boom, also enemy. Chapters of Marines each come from a DNA gene seed from some magnificently terrible ancient warrior and wear armor that's like an A-10 Warthog made love to the loader in the Aliens movies. And they fire guns where the bullets are rockets that explode because normal bullets just aren't cool enough. To give you an idea of how badass Space Marines are so you understand the flavor of the game, they send approximately 3 of these guys in to basically save half the planet. They think 3,000 insectoid enemies careening towards them as a squabble. It's just that to them, a squabble is glassing the planet level of fights. Tyranids are this universe's versions of aliens that come out of the darker parts of the universe, except even the small ones are big, the big ones are colossal, and the colossal ones are, well, you get it. They basically roam around, free-range douchebags fucking up planets, so they send in 3 Space Marines. You go out in third-person combat with up to 2 other players in the main campaign, 3-player PvE battles, as well as 6v6 PvP battles. The easiest way to explain combat is a mix of hack and slash and what is surprisingly competent shooting, combined with assorted built-up powers depending on which of the classes of Space Marines and which character you are in a mode. Up close, your best bet, if you have it, is the Chainsword, a Husqvarna powered by some nebulous high-octane kill juice that luckily never stops, or high-tensile, never-breaking steel. It's an easy enough system to grasp. Swing a fast enough, then insert a longer button press for a special pre-made combo ender. From wave stomps that send entire groups of enemies flying to Spartan kicks that can crack open the carapaces of even the strongest Tyranid to huge 360 swings. Ranged weapons run the gamut from bolt guns to laser pistols, sniper rifles to assault rifles, each with their own abilities, and most of them also have the ability to aim down the barrel, sort of, to take shots at enemies farther off. Most enemies can also be executed when you finally do enough damage to them, which powers up your Space Marine meter. Specials, depending on class, feel pretty good. Pinging enemies with a radar that somehow spots enemy weak spots to make them easier to defeat fits the game's fiction, if not wholly some kind of science. But that's the best part of Warhammer. It just fits, just barely. Speaking of just barely, let's talk about the parry button. So at any time, you can try to parry enemies with your chainsword when they're attacking. Depending on the enemy, this may stagger them back for a moment. Others, it may shirk off, and they may need even more hits because they're stronger. And others, it'll send flying. However, in the light of the couple odd hundred or so that might be trying to get in a shot at you like some shitty MTV roast, parries aren't always the slickest in both feel and appearance and timing, despite a colored icon that appears on main enemies that are attacking. It can be messy. War often is, but the enemy types here, as well as the more gritty muted colors, means that it can be difficult to identify enemies attacking or not, despite the single enemy indicator I talked about before. It's like the colors overlap a bit more here, and while appreciated at times, it's just a wave of viscera and gore that you skate across. I do hope that there's a bit more of a color differentiation as you continue to play the game. I found myself appreciating the darker tones and being infuriated at the same time at that looser feel of the parry, especially against this type of enemy. This is also where it can feel very much like the game is built around co-op, because single player with bots isn't the greatest experience right now, as they don't protect you much. It's like being attacked on all sides by a tyrannical, homicidal pomegranate just exploding red blobs around you, and many times the other characters just don't seem too futzed with caring. And having Bocephus, the apparently one-eyed best friend who can't seem to see you unless you're down, isn't always the easiest way to victory. Now let me explain this with a concrete example. The second PvE level culminates in a huge boss battle against what can only be described as a Tyranid that may have eaten at least half the enemies you saw in a cutscene in an earlier part of the level. A half-open arena that is at times a grand display of the chaos that ensues in a Warhammer Space Marine battle, but at the same time shows that Warhammer needs some balancing, especially if anyone wants to go it alone. PvE mode with one player means the boss only attacks you with specials, or at least 90% of the time, no matter how far away they are from you, which results in 4 to 5 blockable attacks and 1 unblockable but dodgeable attack, plus the additions. Getting downed is frequently the noticeable only time the boss goes after anybody else, and that means when comrades try to heal you, it results in a number of false start resurrections on any difficulty mode. This was replicated with my one mission experience in the campaign as well. It's not that it's not doable, I did, it's just that it's highly artificial feeling, especially when you're a normal Marine and you might be teamed up with an assault unit that could be a huge threat for a boss who just doesn't seem to care that much. Some balancing of those attacks and in particular aggro and threat would be useful. Now, some may say, well, it's got the option for co-op mode, everybody should just play it that way. Exactly, the option's there, and many may not have groups or want to engage with it. No reason to have a mode that isn't set up to offer the best experience if it's in the game in the first place. The PvE levels also change up slightly in the enemy variety and placement, and that's aside from the difficulty levels that you choose. Also, the game handles online a bit wonky right now, but this is for the preview. You have 3 players online co-op, which is great, but people were able to randomly join my game, and there doesn't seem like there's any system to particularly close that down, which isn't something a gamer may want, putting together a game that you want to play with friends to leap into. So when I was playing, trying to record, people just dropped into the game, inevitably ruining footage I was trying to capture. The only way I could find a way to lock out others was to go into offline mode in Steam. However, the game warns you that offline mode isn't saved, at least currently, and I can guarantee you it's not. I'm going to chalk that up to the preview and see how it all works in the review code. It wasn't completely horrible, but it does mean that there's a pretty big difference between the two experiences. Available in the preview was a campaign level as well as these 2 PvE levels, with the campaign level locked to the company's own B-roll footage. The campaign furthers the narrative of Captain Titus and his 2 brothers-in-arms fighting off the Tyranids and other chaotic forces, while the PvE missions were basically just missions based around searching out goals in larger levels, planting mines, finding mines, or mining plants and blowing them up, as well as the ability to put together your own Space Marine across the various classes, outfitting them with unique armors, weapons, skills unlocks with experience points, and more, which I'm going to cover now. And luckily, this was easy enough, but there are a great deal of them, from backpacks to greaves, breastplates, and more, all requiring successful missions in multiples of 7 to unlock the next item. Since each armor piece unlocks at a different number starting out, that means different initial successful missions will unlock different items, meaning you may unlock 7 and then one at 14 for a greave, and it may unlock at 3rd and then 10th for a different item. Initially, I thought this was odd, but it worked out pretty well as I continued to play. You can also unlock chapters and their colors as you level up and get points, including some unknown foundings and Chaos Marine chapters. However, reminder, this is successful missions, meaning if you fail, while you will get experience and points to buy other items, the armor apparently specifically needs successful missions to accomplish. That's again why I brought up the balance issues earlier. Now, each Marine also unlocks skills across their classes, with core, gear, team, and finisher skills, with each class having its own complete set. Each level with that class unlocks a skill. While many are in the percentage base, unfortunately, increases that we expect, most are pretty hefty increases, or additions to bonuses, so they're noticeable. The real juice and the part that's going to make building teams matter so much are the team skills, with only one class truly having a basic healing. Some of the others have massive changes to their brethren whenever in combat, ones that, depending on the mission, are going to make a team turn from a skirmish unit who needs to stay out of direct battle to a bunch of mechanized cans where the enemies forgot the can openers. Especially when combined with your weapon upgrades, with each rarity type having their own perks and other versions able to be unlocked as well. One unique caveat here is that while character skills unlock per level, they're not purchased. You can choose to do so, which is good because some have a bit of a glass cannon feel to them, which may not appeal to everybody. So I actually skipped a couple of the skills that I unlocked and didn't buy them while I bought others. I actually like that. There are also trials you can take as well to test out the particular skills for your classes, and it gives you rewards you can use to unlock items, each specifically related to that class. Graphically, as everything is presented to you, the game is steeped in those gothic futures, that almost religious fervor, constructed chapel spaceships coupled with chain swords. Basically, everything a death metal fan would probably like. The tangible feeling of weight to everything. For example, where Star Wars shows and movies have degenerated into lightsaber battles that look like pissy chipmunks fighting on 2 times the speed, Warhammer's always had a love affair with the gravity of its writing and its characters, both narratively and figuratively. Doesn't mean it's always good, just means there's a weight there, and that animation plays out out here. No better exemplified when pounding down a dirty, muddy hill, and you can watch the Marines leap back like people hiking down an expert trail that they have no right to, or the mud that sloshes up during stomps through blood-filled muddy bogs, or the first time thousands of Tyranids all flock across a disabused bridge, its back broken down the center, almost bird-like as they flock around. If birds were 6 feet tall and had razors for wings and carried guns that shot acid grubs that bored through the world's thickest armors. Where the game succeeds here in the near and far is how it all comes together and looks pretty stunning. Coming out of that scene and back into the closer confines, you start fighting and pulling off fatalities on enemies, tearing off carapaces, catching enemies leaping towards you and tearing off their legs to stab them in their own head and more. Feels good. As the saying goes, the best weapon against an enemy is another enemy. In Warhammer, the best enemy is one used to beat another enemy to death. A light mission here may have over 1,000 enemies, snipers, flying creatures, and the Tyranid's version of the Armored Knight, which, let's be honest, is just another one of them, bigger, badder, and somehow wearing his brother's for armor, and carries a sword made of his own body's bones. And so far, this offers a phenomenal sense of the best atmosphere matching intellectual property in a game so far. The best part is also that this was all delivered at well over 100 FPS on the 4090. Now, you may say that's a powerful card, and it is, but the number of previews that are in the same timeline as this one that didn't come close to that, with hundreds of enemies also in this game cavorting in masses of murderous intent, is very high. Over 50% of games that really haven't reached even close to this performance. So to say that I was happy to see this delivered smoothly was excellent. I did have one noticeable issue, and that's one time per level, or maybe every other level, I had a noticeable screen freeze for 1 to 3 seconds. Interestingly enough, this didn't accompany any more VRAM usage or specific swapping, so I assume that's purely just a software side glitch that'll be remedied later when Space Marine 2 comes out. Warhammer Space Marine 2 does feel like World War Z, though, and I want to explain that. From its Tyranids climbing up the side of a wall next to you to their rush tactics, switching from Relic and the engine they use to Saber's Swarm engine offers a somewhat noticeable change to the feel of the game, combined with this new enemy type, certainly compared to the original game. And much like the underpinnings of World War Z, the enemy classes and different subspecies fits nice into ranged and damage-based delivery systems. Armored but slow tanks eliciting a nerve-wracking dance of blocking and parrying is offset by the more swarm-like smaller species, eaten up easily by a sword swing or two or a couple shots, though they stagger and parry, and that can be interruptive, especially when in mass. Those enemies are then reinforced by ranged biological swarm bolt-firing enemies, as well as their compatriots and poison, the long-range snipers, who can send your Marine flying backwards with whatever their version of a 50 caliber slug is. Space Marines and Tyranids have always been the Warhammer universe's bloodiest peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It's a beautiful, nasty mess that is, at the best of times, a glorious holdover to the action of Gears of War with an enemy count of World War Z mixed in. Right now, Warhammer Space Marine also plays pretty damn good with some issues, and Warhammer always seemed to play well, no less a result of the functional changes from the original game, as well as a mirror put up to World War Z as its contemporary. Taking out clutches of Tyranids with the ilk of all assorted weapons feels familiar. That being said, the locations in particular, the PvE locations, can feel a bit ground down under the stomp of your giant feet after 3 or 4 times running through them, and that might be just because, unlike some other games of this sort, for instance, Back 4 Blood, the game's levels here are a bit more open, with a few shortcuts of new ways to work through them, but not many, though the elements of randomness for enemy makeup and appearance do change it up a bit. That does mean, though, that clutching victory at the end of a tense fight feels awesome, especially as Warhammer seems to love to flood you with so many of them, boosting out of crevices and cliff faces like the world's angriest babies trying to set birth records. Waves of incoming enemies are flung out of what appears to be monster closet trebuchets, just landing between you and on top of different locations, crawling up walls. The mangled ragdolls of human comrades fly past you as you chainsaw through some carapace of an alien spider crab hybrid. Feels good. It's a fine line between the sheer anarchy and mess of Warhammer games and a nice level of expertise and fidelity that the player can demonstrate with continued playtime. As the age-old saying goes, in peace, sons bury their fathers; in war, fathers bury their sons. And in Warhammer, Space Marines bury everybody. Will Space Marine bury everything this fall? I'm not sure, but it's going to do its best. Does have some issues that I want to test when the review code comes, as well as how this change in its overall feel and format and that adjustment reflects upon longer periods of gameplay. But so far, it's been a pretty enjoyable time.